By April, the greenhouse at home is bursting at the seams with plants ready to be hardened off and go out onto the plot. April is a really sort of in-between time in the year, and what you should be doing on the plot is very much dependent on the weather. In colder areas, you can catch up on any March jobs that you weren't able to do, while in warmer areas, you can really push on and sow some tender veg ready to go out in the plot in May. But wherever you are, always watch the weather forecast rather than the calendar. Early potatoes are planted in March, ready to give delicious harvests of new potatoes in June or July. As the green shoots start to emerge from the soil, it's time to earth them up. We do this for several reasons. It helps to get the potato to make more tubers under the ground. It also helps to stop the potatoes pushing out of the soil and turning green and actually going poisonous. And of course it protects the foliage from frost. Potatoes hate the cold, so if the temperatures are forecast for 2 degrees or less, maybe pop a bit of fleece on as well. To earth up the potatoes, use a spade or a draw hoe like this. If the ground's quite hard, you might need to break it up first with a fork, but then gently push the soil over the plant. Keep on doing this over the next few weeks, and eventually you'll wind up with a mound that's about 30 centimetres in diameter and height. The brassicas we sowed in the greenhouse in March are now ready to go into the soil. Don't worry though if you haven't sown any, as you can easily buy plants at the garden centre. Water the plants well so they easily come out of their little pots. Now when you plant them, brassicas really want to go in firmly. Dig the hole so that the first leaf is just about resting on the surface of the soil, and then get your hands in and really push them down. You can tell when the brassica's firm enough when you pull on that leaf, and the leaf would rip rather than the plant pulling out of the ground. Cover the plants straight away with a fine mesh such as Enviromesh, as there's loads of pests that love to eat brassicas. Maincrop varieties produce big potatoes that are great for roasting and baking and mashing. They're traditionally planted around about Easter, but as Easter moves every year, mid-April to late April is a safe bet in most areas. In the north though, you might be better off waiting till May. Space the rows about 75 centimetres apart and put in the potatoes about 38 centimetres apart. Grown this way, you should reckon on about 6 kilograms of potato per metre squared. Aim to use early main crops such as King Edward before Christmas, though later ones such as Cara can keep on going well into the new year. If blight is a persistent problem in your area, try one of the Sharpo varieties such as Sharpo Mira or Sharpo Axona, both of which have performed really well in the witch gardening trials. If you grew potatoes in your garden last year, you may find that you missed a few and they're now coming up. It's really tempting to leave them in the soil, but unfortunately you're far better to dig them up as they've probably already got blight infection. We sowed these onion plants in the greenhouse back in February, but don't worry if you haven't done that yourself, as you can easily buy plants from the garden centre or these little immature bulbs called sets. Plant onions about 10 centimetres apart. If you want to have smaller bulbs, sow them closer together. If you want to have larger ones, a little bit further away again. As the weather starts to warm up, you'll start to see weeds germinating in the soil. This is a sign that hardier vegetables such as lettuce will be all right to be sown outside. However, you better get on with controlling the weeds or your crops will suffer from the competition. The easiest way to control annual weeds is to use a hoe, which will cut them off. Try not to go too deeply into the soil though, or you'll disturb the weed seeds that are underneath. As the weather starts to warm up in April, the soil warms up too, and you can make the first sowings direct into the soil. However, in northern gardens, you might be better off waiting until May. When you sow, you can do little short rows of quick growing crops such as lettuce and carrots, and these will give you harvests in a few weeks' time. Which gardening research has shown that the best way to time your sowings so you don't get gluts or big gaps between them is to wait until the previous sowing has come up and you've got seedlings, and then make the next sowing. A good tip is to sow your seedlings nice and thinly so you don't need to do much thinning out later on. Which gardening research has shown that if you cover your sowings with plastic, they'll germinate quickly. For parsnips, sow every 15 centimetres. Parsnips can be a real pain to germinate even with fresh seed, so be patient and be careful not to hoe for weeds until you're sure your seedlings have germinated. Cover the crops with a fine mesh such as EnviroMesh right from the word go, and you'll have a lot less problems with pests. Salad leaves we sowed in the greenhouse back in February are now ready to cut. When you cut them, do it about 2 centimetres away from the base to leave a little stump, and then a few weeks later that little stump will regrow some new leaves. What you can do to help them though is to keep them really moist and give them a bit of a feed. You'll probably get another couple of cuts out of this pot, but for really good salad leaves I'd recommend sowing another pot now and then carry on doing it like that through the summer, maybe outdoors on the patio rather than in the greenhouse though, and you'll have salads all summer long. The courgette plants that we sowed back in February are now ready to be potted on for some early crops in the greenhouse. Take the plant out of its pot by giving it a gentle squeeze and then make it a hole in a bigger pot. I've used a pot here that's about 30 centimetres in diameter. It's nice and deep as well to give the courgette plenty of room to grow. The variety we're growing again is called Parthenon. This is special because it doesn't need to have any pollinators to help set the fruit. So it will grow well in the greenhouse here where maybe there's not many bees and things. Now this will get watered in and left in a quiet place in the greenhouse, and we should start to get some fruit soon because I can already see some flowers coming here, and then we'll be getting some earlier crops than we would do in the ground. As greenhouse veg such as tomatoes and peppers and aubergine start to germinate from being sown last month, they're now ready to be moved into individual pots. Use a dibber if you've got one, or even a pen like this. Push it into the compost nice and deep and lever out a seedling. Now the important thing with a seedling is to never touch the stem as it's very delicate. Always hold it by the seed leaves here. Now I've already got a compost in a pot over here, and I'm going to gently lift the seedling out. With tomatoes, they can actually go in very deep, so they're almost up to their seed leaves in the new compost. This is because tomatoes root from the stems, and so you'll get nice bushy strong plants if you do that. Use the dibber to gently push the compost around the plant and then just gently firm it in as well, but all the time being careful not to touch that stem. Many of us enjoy tender veg such as sweet corn and beans. Now all of these veg hate the frost, so don't be tempted to sow them too early. In northern gardens you'd be better off waiting until May before you sow them, but in the south you can get away with April. Now if you don't have a greenhouse, don't worry, you can sow all of these direct in the soil once the soil has warmed up in May or even June if you want. You can choose between either climbing or dwarf beans. The key is though is not to go too mad, as a wigwam of only 12 plants can make an amazing 12 kilograms of beans. Now to sow the beans, just make a hole in the compost and pop the seeds in there. You can either sow 1 or 2 if you want, and then remove an extra seedling later on. Push the compost over and that'll soon come up. The large seeds of courgettes and squashes should be sown individually in small pots. Now don't go mad when you're doing courgettes. 2 plants can provide up to 30 kilograms of fruit, which is quite a lot really. And also squashes need masses of room to be able to spread around in your vegetable garden, so just sow a few. Place the seed on its side as it's supposed to be, less likely to rot that way. Sweet corn's incredibly tasty, but sometimes it's not always best to grow in the garden. You'll only get 1 or 2 cobs from each plant, and you need to grow them in a group of at least 12 so that they can pollinate each other. So it will take up a lot of space for not a huge amount of return. If you are determined though, you can sow the sweet corn in a pot in April. Either sow 1 or 2 seeds per pot. If you sow 2, just thin out the weaker seedling later on. Dwarf beans such as Stanley give lower yields over a shorter period than runner beans, but they're still very good value as you can sow them several times from April onwards right through till about July or even August if you want to push it. The early crops can be sown in the greenhouse in individual pots or modular trays, ready for planting out in May once the danger of frost has passed, and the later crops can be sown directly in the ground where you want them to grow. Runner beans and climbing French beans are too tender to go straight out into the soil in April. You're far better off sowing them in pots on the windowsill or in the greenhouse and then planting them out once the danger of frost has gone in May or even June in northern gardens. Don't be tempted to sow them too early though, as they'll get growing really quickly and you'll end up with huge plants that are desperate to grow in the garden. By April, the greenhouse tomatoes that we sow back in March will be making lovely little plants in pots. They're still too small though to go into growing bags or pots, so just keep them growing until we're ready in May. Now, if you're thinking about sowing some outdoor tomatoes, April is the time. Outdoor tomatoes are particularly vulnerable to blight, which causes the fruit to turn brown and horrible at the end of the summer. So try to grow a variety that's resistant to blight, such as Crimson Crush or Mountain Magic. Tender herbs such as coriander and basil don't like the frost, so make the first sowing of the year in your greenhouse in pots or on the windowsill indoors. Later on we can be sowing them direct outside. Sow about half a dozen seeds in a small pot, or you can sow them in a modular tray. Then they can just be planted out like this, so you're not disturbing the roots, which they don't like at all.